Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Reversing Hashimoto's. I am your show host, Dr. Anshul Gupta, a world expert in Hashimoto's disease. I help people reverse their Hashimoto's through functional medicine. And today we are having a great guest, which is a wealth of knowledge, Dr. Sham. Again, I mispronounced the name. I'm really sorry. Dr. Sam Shay. I got it right this time. So, welcome over here. But let me introduce you first before we actually go into this great discussions about lab testing and about all genetics and all the other things linked to Hashimoto's. So, Dr. Shay actually solves health puzzles for busy, health conscious moms, entrepreneurs, and those with Asperger's so that they can exit survival mode and re enter community. Dr. Shay specializes in functional labs and genetic analysis and is known as the affable lab nerd. Dr. Shay loves to teach on podcasts and summits to empower the public with knowledge about functional labs. Dr. Shay is also a stand up comic using clean observational comedy to educate and entertain. He is currently finishing up his first 1 hour special focusing on what it's like to have Asperger's. Dr. Shay, welcome over here to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm known as the affable lab nerd. And I love talking about labs. I feel like it's one of the most empowering things that we can do to help individuals. And Hashimoto's in particular has a very, very special place in my heart on my journey to becoming a lab nerd. It actually started back in 2014, almost 10 years ago at the time of this recording, where I had a client come to me and she had literally every sign of hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. And her endocrinologist in New Zealand just tested her TSH. Her TSH, which was the only thing he tested, was normal. And he told her to her face, your thyroid is fine. You're just depressed. Go take an antidepressant and stop complaining. And when she told this to me, it's there's only less than the number of fingers on my hand times in my life I've actually seen red. I've been that angry. I was clearly not angry at my client. I was angry at this endocrinologist for being so dismissive and heartless. A few times I saw red and quickly passed, and then I told those clients, I'm going to help you. Let me get back to you and figure out some better labs for you. So that's when I began my search into functional lab testing for thyroid, and I'll be talking about that at length today. And that was my journey. It actually started with thyroid issues. In terms of my true deep dive. I mean, I learned lab testing years and years prior, but really deep diving, I was like, okay, I have to do labs now because this will not stand. I will not let this happen again to anyone who I'm working with.
And I think a lot of people over here who are listening will resonate with that because so many people have been to their practitioners, have been telling them that they have these signs and symptoms, and only lab which has been run is TSH. It takes them years and years finally to get a proper diagnosis and get on the treatment. So I totally agree that, I think the lab testing, is so important for proper lab testing of thyroid, Hashimoto's, and knowing each and every labs that can be very, very helpful. So I'm glad that we are talking about these things so that people can feel empowered that, they can do things right now to know what is wrong with their body and how to fix it.
It's never been a better time, to better understand functional medicine because the labs are just so accessible right now. And the intention of this talk, for those that are watching, you get an extra support because there's a visual presentation that I've put together because this topic means so much to me. Those of you just listening, don't worry. Like you'll be able to understand everything that's going on because I'll be talking through it. The intention of this talk is to go over the missing labs that are relevant to Hashimoto. So we talked about thyroid, which is pretty straightforward. Get thyroid testing. We're going to talk more about how many extra markers you should be getting for that within the thyroid itself. But there's other labs and other systems involved. And that's what this talk's going to be. It's not going to be prescribing or recommending like, okay, you need this specific supplement. That's not what I'm doing. It's let me empower you with all the different lab categories you need to know, and the different names of the different labs and why those labs are relevant to what you're going through. So this, you can be empowered, and when you go to any practitioner you choose to work with, you now have way better knowledge on what labs are available and what labs you could realistically ask for or inquire about. So my story of how I got into functional medicine is pretty long and pretty harrowing. The very short version is I was very sick as a child, starting from age 6 and through a teenager. Crippling insomnia to the point where it stunted my growth. I had crippling insomnia from age 6 to 18 during my growth years. Was a lot of violence at school, and consequently a lot of spinal pain that went untreated until I was in high school. I developed 2 addictions: video game and sugar addiction, anxiety, depression, and a terrible diet, and not the best family life. And I just made a decision in high school that I need to take control of my health and to take control of my life. Otherwise, this was just going to get worse and worse and worse. I was supposed to be the 3rd generation medical doctor. Both my parents are medical doctors, and my grandfather was as well. And he was a very famous one. He actually started the Fels Cancer Research Center at Temple University. He was the founding director, rather, in 1937. And my father also is a major figure in the psychiatry world. He coined the term moral injury, and he also has a MacArthur Award for his work working with veterans and explaining moral injury and the unique effect betrayal does on trauma and psychology. And so I was supposed to be a 3rd generation medical doctor, but I took a hard pivot into natural medicine when my parents tried to drug me into submission of my depression, as opposed to deal with the root causes of what was actually happening. And so I pivoted, and so I went into natural medicine instead. And from there, I got very heavily into lab testing, and the focus today is Hashimoto's. And I want to talk about the 5 main lab phenomenon that influence the thyroid, where the thyroid can actually be a secondary effect, not a primary issue. Where certainly Hashimoto's is like the primary concern, but what's causing it or contributing to it in a meaningful way is of great interest. So, for example, the mitochondria. To me, the mitochondria is one of the least discussed connection points to the thyroid, because to me, the mitochondria is the business end of the thyroid. So when people talk about this term, basal metabolic rate, we've all heard this term, but who has actually defined it? And what it is calculating how much your mitochondria burn protein, fats, and carbs for energy. That's basal metabolic rate. So the way I explain this to my clients is that T4 that leaves the thyroid is the 4-wheel car that leaves the thyroid and drives through the bloodstream to the mitochondria. And then it opens one door and makes that transformer robot noise, burp, 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 to like change into this 3-legged engineer, T3, that is the engine that mashes the buttons to dial up the mitochondria to burn more proteins, fats, and carbs. That's what, and so the issue becomes, if you can have, quote, normal thyroid markers, but the signs of hypothyroidism, because the problem is with the factory that the T3 engineer is trying to turn on, not with the engineer itself. So the thyroid is the signaling molecule, but the mitochondria is the business end of what the thyroid actually acts on. So this is how you help mitochondria. That's a whole separate discussion. That's a massive discussion. Plenty of other videos and stuff on YouTube I've done on that. But needless to say that checking mitochondria is pivotal to understanding the thyroid, because it's literally the other end of the thyroid. So I want to say that up front, because I feel like that is the least discussed of all the dyads, the pairings of thyroids that are out there. The second pairing I want to talk about is the estrogen thyroid connection. So there's a reason why more women get thyroid issues, is because estrogen dominance can suppress thyroid function. So managing estrogen and looking at estrogen levels, and like not just estradiol. I mean, in functional testing, one of the most famous tests is called the Dutch test, where you look at 7 types of estrogens and then the whole pathway, testosterone through aromatase. And we can nerd out on jargon and Scrabble words all we want. But knowing the entire estrogen pathway is critical to optimizing your thyroid. The other connection is the adrenals. And so cortisol, and the whole cortisol adrenal cascade, if the thyroid and the adrenal glands are kind of oppositional pairs. The adrenal glands are in one use of it is for survival. It's short-term survival, where thyroid can be generally understood as long-term healing, health, growth, repair. And so they're in opposition when you're in a stress emergency situation. So it makes sense that the adrenals will, in an acute emergency, will take over and shut down the thyroid and reallocate resources for acute survival, because acute survival is more important than long-term growth if you're in a survival situation. So if your adrenals are out of whack, your thyroid can be suppressed, whether it's through the T4 to T3 conversion being suppressed, or the any other mechanism that's involved in the various cascades of getting thyroid to be optimally functional. You need to have a balanced adrenal glands. Then you've got iron deficiency, and it's not just iron, it's looking at nutrient deficiencies as a whole as it relates to thyroid. So things like tyrosine, iron, vitamin A, vitamin D, selenium, zinc, various B vitamins, whatever. Like nutritional deficiencies relate to thyroid. So knowing and analyzing nutritional deficiencies is critical to thyroid health. And then lastly, the one that most people are aware about as a connection of thyroid to Hashimoto's is gut, and the connection of a permeable gut, or what's called in our universe like a quote unquote leaky gut. That's its relationship to Hashimoto's. And directly, I'll show you 5 major connections of the gut to Hashimoto's. So the basic
So, Dr. Shay, let
understanding.
me just
Yes.
ask you this question over here. Go on the previous slide. So obviously you have these
Sure.
5 connections. So each and every person that is working with you or you're evaluating for Hashimoto's, do you do all the testing to evaluate these things, or how you go about taking care of them?
So when I work with someone who's struggling with thyroid concerns, I optimally I run all of these things at the same time to see which of these is the actual priority, or which combination of the priorities, because we can do very in-depth lifestyle analysis and historical analysis and so on, and get a really clear idea of what is going on. But to really understand what biochemistry has been damaged, you need to test all of them. And it's to me like every one of them can be the pivot point to address all of them, to address the whole issue and the things we don't know. And usually what I see is that 1 or 2 of these is really major influence, but there's 1 or 2 other ones that are of minor but meaningful contribution as well. And the thing is, I don't know which ones they are. If someone is having an autoimmune response to their thyroid, I mean, the gut is mandatory. I mean, and we're going to discuss why just literally in the next slide of like why that would be. But
So main important point I think over here is also is that a lot of these tests, the regular or conventional doctors might not even be aware of that the tests exist
correct.
to check for them. So that's where you might need to work with a functional or an integrative or a holistic doctor to get these testing.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. And like it's just a matter of training and focus. And the functional testing is functional medicine testing is not standard within biomedicine, Western medicine. And one of the reasons for that is that the solutions that are offered through functional medicine, the first reflex is not pharmacy, radiation, or surgery. It's nutrition and lifestyle. And that's not within the financial models of the pharmaceutical companies and the testing companies that are yoked together and that are sponsoring every room and building at a medical school. So they're not they're hard on any insurance plans. They're not encouraged simply because it's against the financial models of the larger medical establishment. The answers we offer are getting you healthier, not keeping you in a tolerable level of symptomatic health while sustaining you on a pharmaceutical. So I'm not against pharmaceuticals. They're a tool. It's just a matter of, is it the right tool for the right duration at the right amount for the right purpose? And is there a strategy to get to a state of health to not need it anymore? I view pharmaceuticals as a way to buy time to figure out what's going on that caused the situation in the first place that necessitated the need for the pharmaceutical to buy you time and to buy you the time. So basically, if your life is so disoriented and dysregulated by whatever health issue you're going through that you need a pharmaceutical to buy time, then that makes a lot of sense to me. But is there a plan to figure out what actually got you there and to get you off of it?
Absolutely. Yes. Let's delve into the things that you want to discuss now.
Absolutely. So the way that leaky gut connects to Hashimoto's is that your gut is basically a complicated tube with a filter on the inside. And the filter is supposed to filter nutrients, water, nutrients, water, vitamins, minerals, etc., to go into your body. It's like a hole of a donut. When you eat food and food is in your intestines, it's not technically in your body, it's going through your body. Like I put my finger through the hole of a donut, my finger's not in the donut, it's through the donut. So when the food is going through your intestines, then if it goes into your body, it goes across this filter. This filter is very tight, and it's not supposed to let infections, their residues, their excreta, or undigested proteins or anything else through that filter into the bloodstream. If something does get through, like the filter has holes in it and is air quotes leaky, that it's leaking bacteria, its residues, or fecal matter or undigested proteins directly into the blood. Now the blood has this like, oh my God, we got these really weird things floating around. We need to send out these shape-seeking missiles, not heat-seeking, shape-seeking missiles called antibodies that then attach themselves to these weird-looking things and mark them for the immune system to be taken out. So what happens is that if you have certain things that leak through, they have certain shapes. And unfortunately, certain things that leak through have shapes that are similar to thyroid tissue. And so these shape-seeking missiles are dummy bullets. They just attack whatever looks similar, and they will attack it as collateral damage. It's like walking into the middle of a war between the Bloods and the Crips. You walk into Crips territory wearing a red shirt through no fault of your own. They think you're on the opposite camp and you're just shot. And it's the same thing, like the thyroid is just shot because it looks like an invading something or other. So blastocystis hominis is one infection that looks similar enough to thyroid tissue that the antibody to blastocystis will attack thyroid. Same thing with Yersinia enterolytica. H. pylori, this is just literally just off PubMed. You can see it right up here. Search term, H. pylori Hashimoto's. That's all I put in, and there's just like result after result after result after result. You can look this up yourself. If you have H. pylori and it leaks through, you can get an autoimmune response attacks of thyroid, Epstein-Barr, and then the big one is gluten. Put that in red. Gluten can create the antibodies that attack thyroid tissue. So this is also why you see this connection between celiac and Hashimoto's is because of this specific connection. So what's really useful about running a gut test and identifying these hidden infections, and also if you have a gluten immune response, is that you can really do something like heal, seal, and soothe the gut, and then get rid of these infections, and then also remove gluten permanently, like non-negotiably remove gluten. So this is why gut testing can be so valuable, is because you can identify and then figure out strategies to remove the thing that's actually triggering the immune response, and then change your diet so that you're not actually gluten can only shred up the gut and break the tight junctions and make your gut leaky in the first place. It could also then leak through itself and then create the autoimmune response directly. So it's a double whammy with gluten. So this is one reason why functional testing is so valuable. And additionally, if people listening to this, if you're living with someone who's skeptical that diet change, whether it's a partner, a family member, a friend, or a medical doctor, frankly, who doesn't believe you that diet can affect Hashimoto's, well, guess what? Right there, gluten. And then you could take this data and say, like, right there, this is why we need to shift here our diet and our lifestyle. And the one thing about testing in general that I also want to address is, some people say, oh, testing takes up time and it's expensive. Like, well, to me, having an autoimmune disease, the thyroid long term, is very expensive by itself. And there is an upfront investment if you're doing testing, but you save massive amounts of money long term because you're actually doing the things you actually need to do. You're not chasing after shiny object syndrome because someone talked about a laser over here or coconut oil extract over there, a goji berry juice you snort up your left nostril over here, whatever it is. I don't know. Like you're saving time and you're saving money because you're actually doing the things that your biochemistry needs. Then there's the hormone tests themselves. And we talked about before, like adrenal, sex hormones, and then thyroid testing. And there's roughly 5 categories of testing. There's hormone testing, gut testing, mitochondrial and blood testing, genetics testing, and then the weird stuff, which is like metal, mold, and Lyme, the bad stuff you don't want. So these are functional hormone tests. There's 3 main ones: adrenals, sex hormones, and thyroid. So there's three major companies that have cortisol testing. Other companies have them as well. I'm not excluding those that have them. I believe ZRT has one. There's many companies out there. I just want to mention some of the bigger players: Genova, Precision Analytical, and Doctors Data. And getting an adrenal stress test. I really encourage people to get the cortisol awakening response. It's a newer addition to the adrenal testing to look at your stress resilience, the way you respond to stress. Then there's sex hormones, and the most popular one is Dutch. There are some other competitors that are coming onto market as well. But the basic premise is you want to get not just, a test for estradiol and that's it. That's about as effective as just testing for TSH. There's value in one metabolite, but there is exponentially more value in getting the entire series of metabolites in order so you can map out the entire pathway. So Dutch test is a very popular one. There are other ones, but again, the premise is getting the entire hormone cascade as opposed to just one metabolite. And then thyroid, like these are the minimum 6 I would run of the thyroid. There's additional ones that are available. So the minimum 6 I would run would be TSH, free T3, free T4, reverse T3, antibodies to thyroglobulin and also to thyroperoxidase, known as anti-TG or anti-TPO. There's other ones, anti-TSH receptors. There's total T3. There's total T4. There's a couple others, but these are the 6. And I don't know about you, Dr. Gupta, but I've only had one case in my entire career where only the anti-TSH receptors were high, antibodies were high, and everything else was normal. So that was so rare, I kind of stopped asking for anti-TSH. Has that been your experience, that's been the rarer one that's been elevated?
That's true. Yeah, we generally typically again don't do that test in our practice too, because again, like there is so much money involved in these testing, and that is really very high. So it doesn't change the protocols that much.
Yeah, it's so it's like even like we're just like these. That's why I say these are the core 6. Other people can order more on top, but these would be the minimum, I would say.
So I just want to kind of touch on the little bit on the Dutch test, because most people go to their regular doctors and ask for like, okay, well, they check my estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. What Dr. Shay is talking about is that, estrogen breaks down into different metabolites, right? And some of them are safer and some of them are not safer for your own body. And this particular test is really great in identifying whether your estrogen is metabolizing to the safer versions or not. So again,
correct.
Your doctor, if they check your estrogen, they say, well, everything is okay. That doesn't really mean everything is okay until you check all the metabolites. Is that correct?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'll throw in a little extra bonus concern here for people who are wanting, think they need more testosterone. And the Dutch test is great for identifying, like, do you actually need more testosterone, or do you need to reduce estrogen dominance, or do you need to fix the enzyme that converts between testosterone and estrogen? I've seen it so many times. Male clients is, oh, I need testosterone, I need testosterone. And I was like, do you really, or do you just have a hormone imbalance? And I'll give one example of a guy came to me who got testosterone shots, and before he saw me, before I knew him, and he started developing man boobs, and he got fatter. And he's like, I don't understand. I got testosterone. What happened? And I said, well, because testosterone converts into estrogen if this enzyme called aromatase is overactive, if you're inflamed or exposed to plastics, or you have other lifestyle problems going on. If you are given testosterone, it actually may backfire, because it will just all convert into estrogen and get the opposite effect you're looking for. So the answer is not necessarily testosterone. The answer is fix your lifestyle and stop the estrogen dominance. And it's the Dutch test that's one of the clearest windows into that to see what you need to do. Is it actually a testosterone issue, or is it a problem with testosterone conversion? So yeah, that's a little enticement for people who are concerned about testosterone. This is an example of a comprehensive thyroid assessment, whether it's Genova or Access Medical. It's just kind of looking at their bell curves. And I just want to point out that there's a difference between medical normals and functional optimals. I'll say that again. There's medical normals, which is this bell curve. Then there is functional optimals. So what the gray space is the space outside the functional optimals, but before the boundaries of the medical normals. So at your quote medically normal, which is what happens to my client with her TSH, she's normal, go away, but she wasn't functionally optimal. So this is this gray space that functional medicine operates in, that we can help with that gray space, plus with getting to your optimal. Western medicine is trained, but the background of Western medicine was based on triage, military medicine. Do you have the emergency or not? So unfortunately, biochemical ranges are, do you have the disease or not? Everything else is irrelevant. Go sit over there in your triage with the other people who aren't dying right now. So, and it's a philosophy issue that Western medicine was born on the battlefield. And that's why emergency care in Western medicine is literally the best. Like the emergency says the emergency tools we have for toys to help in emergency care in Western medicine is great. Not a lot of those in natural medicine and functional medicine. Like, not a lot, because the philosophy is for Western medicine is perfect for emergency care, and it's kind of fuzzy for optimizing and normal for everything else, because they're fixed in this on presence. Is it pathological or not? So functional medicine is where that bridge, that estuary between natural medicine and Western medicine. I say functional medicine is the best of Western medicine diagnostics with the best of natural medicine lifestyle interventions. So when you're looking at thyroid labs or any labs, you have to think, okay, there's functional optimals and there's medical normals. And you got to look at these, where are you in all these different bell curves? This is a ZRT thyroid lab, and it looks at various thyroid markers, but also the different toxic and necessary. Fame knows about iodine, but there's also the lightweight halides that can interfere with iodine, like bromine and so on. Then this is a New Zealand, Australia version out of Nutripath, and I'm going to show you a real client of mine. This is February 2017. Her anti-thyroglobulin antibodies were 442, about 4x the upper limit, and less than a year later, they were down to 35, well within normal range. And in her case, her major adjuvant, the main thing that was annoying or upsetting her immune system, was gluten. That was the main thing that was going on there. The next set of lab tests is gut testing, the three main gut tests. There's the big general gut tests, which I believe is the most important to do. So there's Diagnostic Solutions Lab. They have the GI map. Genova has the GI effects. Dr. Data has the GI 360. Then there's this thing called the CDSA, which is across multiple different companies, or comprehensive digestive stool analysis. This is the big one that looks for the infections I mentioned before and the gluten antibodies. SIBO is a more recent test. That's more of a breath test. Genova has one. There's another one called like a tri-SIBO or tri-breath. I'm blanking on the name. It's a newer company where they're looking at hydrogen sulfide as well. And then there's food sensitivities. Now, these are relevant because if you're eating something that's annoying your gut and causing it to be more inflamed and leaky, that can then provoke further leakage of the 5 things that can trigger the immune response to the gut. Then we've got mitochondria, brain, liver, anemia, and blood sugar. This is basically all the labs that require a blood draw, and just lump them together. Part of what we do in functional medicine is like, how can we lump the tests together so that it's logistically easy? Can you just get one blood draw session to get all the things you need, as opposed to having get one and then a month later another one, and so on and so forth? So the mitochondria testing, this is, like I said, it's the other end of the thyroid. Genova has the Organics Comprehensive Profile. Diagnostic Solutions Lab has the OMX. Great Plains has the OAT test. Then there's the more advanced one called the Genova's Ion Panel. There's also something called the Metabolomics and the Nutrivel from Genova. That's actually a long history because Metametrics originally made the Ion Panel. Dr. Lord, who we actually owe over half of all functional tests to him. He developed them. And then what happened is that Genova bought them out. Genova made a competitor to the Ion Panel called the Nutrivel. Then they bought out Metametrics, so they had all of them under one roof. And they made the metabolomics test during COVID because they wanted to remove the blood draw. So they switched over to a blood spot technology. It's fewer metabolites, but it's an approximation to what the Ion Panel was, but just not having to go get a blood draw in a clinic. So there's a lot of competition, and my O test is bigger than your test. Like the labs fight with each other all the time, and just roll with it. Then there's the blood tests that are just really important. I recommend anyone get an anemia panel. Iron, TIBC, ferritin, B12, folate. Get blood sugar regulation. Blood sugar affects thyroid, like hemoglobin A1C. Check if your pancreas is working with fasting insulin, fasting glucose, pancreatic elastase and lipase. And there's many labs that run these tests: Access Medical, Quest, Vibrant America, Boston Health, etc. And then we've got the really weird stuff, which you really don't want to have. That's mold, metals, Lyme, and environmental toxins. There's mycotox tests from Great Plains. Vibrant Wellness has mycotoxins. If you're concerned about Lyme, there's the tick-borne or IGeneX has testing. Metals, a lot of companies have their own metals tests. Quicksilver Scientifics has its own metals tests. Total Tox Burn by Vibrant America has metals and environmental toxins and so on in there. So these are the major functional tests that if this sounds like a lot of information, it is, but I want this to be the first pass where you hear about these tests by name and by company, not when you're sitting in front of a practitioner. Like you want to be educated before you walk in, as much as is realistic. So I just want to empower you by just hearing it for the first time and knowing how they're categorized. Hormones, gut, mitochondria, weird stuff. That's the easiest way to think about it. And there's 3 main tests underneath each of those categories. And then the other one to look at is genetics. Oh, by the way, sorry, before I do that, in brief, if you go work with a functional practitioner, make sure they have a framework by which to view your lifestyle and your health. My framework I developed is called the 10 Pillars of Health. I have an ebook on this. I have talks on YouTube about it. This is not a 10-pillar talk. The point is, make sure the person you're working with has a framework. Mine's the 10 pillars. They can be the triangle of health. It can be the inverted hypotenuse of wellness. I don't care. They just have to have a framework. Have a framework. And if the reason is because then you can really logically look at what tests and what lifestyle changes need to be done. The next major set of tests is genetics, particularly as it relates to inflammation. Genetic testing it's a big topic, and the most important things people need to understand about genetics as it relates to Hashimoto's is you want to make sure that your test really looks at the inflammatory pathway in detail. And the point of inflammation is to protect the body from damage and from infections. That's the point of it. If I'm out there, I go back to evolutionary biology. If I'm out there hunting a big animal with a tiny stick, and I get trampled, mauled, bitten, gored, or clawed, if I have a strong inflammatory response, blood will rush to that area and swell up to bring red blood cells to repair the damage and bring white blood cells to try to kill the infections that were injected by the bite wound. That's the point of inflammation. If I have a strong inflammatory response, I am more likely to live past that acute injury from the bite. If I am less inflammatory prone, I am less likely to survive an acute attack, but I'm more likely to live longer because I won't have as many chronic diseases. So in all things in evolution and nature, it's trade-offs. So being hyper-inflammatory in today's environment is not as useful as it was 200, 2,000, 200,000 years ago when we were more prone to physical injuries. So it's all things trade-off. So inflammation is not bad. It's just, is it proportionate to what's going on? And so for some of us, we have a hyper-reactive inflammatory response, myself included, where instead of a little Bic lighter of inflammation, we have an inferno, or we can't get rid of the inflammation, so it just stays at the simmering hot level like holes in a fire, or we don't have a fire hose to put it out, we have a little squirt gun. And that relates to Hashimoto's, because if our gut's inflamed and we can't put out the inflammation, we're at more risk for leaky gut and more risk of these molecules leaking in and creating cross reactions to the thyroid. So by knowing your genetics, you can then have customized lifestyle changes, nutrients, and diets that are based on your genetics to put control over inflammation at the genetic level. And these recommendations for genetics, they're permanent. Functional tests are great, but they're ephemeral. The value of them drops after 6 to 12 months, and they're just used for historical analysis, not for any decision making in real time. But genetics, once you get genetics, like you got these results for life, and it's probably the highest value on return of investment for any test out there is genetics, simply because the value of the information never decays. And also, if you want to really get some value for your genetics, learn about your diet genetically, because some people are genetically keto or paleo or Mediterranean or high carb. There's now genetic tests out there that let you determine your carb tolerance. And it's actually, it's not based on the variation of the gene. It's actually the duplicates of a specific gene that tell you how well you can actually break down carbohydrates, which determines are you keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb. The other thing to look for is your vitamin D absorption genetically. So getting vitamin D into your blood is one thing. Getting it into the cells through the VDR receptors is another. So I found Dr. Gupta, and in the 7 years I've done genetics testing, the number one predictor genetically that someone's going to have chronic issues is they have variants in their VDR genes.
Wow.
As the number one predictor. And this is really important, because vitamin D is like, it's estimated controls up to 5% of your entire genome. That's an insane amount of DNA. Insane. Most of it relating to inflammation and immunity. And what are we talking about with Hashimoto's? Inflammation and immunity, like yoked right there. So getting your vitamin D receptor genes tested is absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. When you ask me, like, do I run all these tests together of the functions? Like, yes, along with genetics, ideally. And if you're going to start somewhere, if someone like has to start somewhere with Hashimoto's, I would say they would want to do 3 main tests. They want to get their genetics done, they want to get their gut tests, and they want to get the Dutch test done. Those 3. If they'll start with 3 of them, because that way you catch the adrenals, you catch the sex hormones, and you catch the gut, and you catch the genetics. And then that would be the baseline minimum that I
I
would
think
look
that's,
for.
yeah, I think that summarizes really well, because obviously a lot
And
of people
thyroid,
who
of
are,
course.
right,
And thyroid.
obviously, like, I'm sure that a lot of people will get the thyroid testing. But I think that that makes a lot of people, like, comfortable that at least they can do these testing and get a lot of information. An important piece is that, we are just not ordering these tests for information. This information will be valuable in making protocols for you. So we can fix
Mhm.
the problems which these tests show. It's just not for information purposes, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. This is not a vanity test. It's like, oh, yes, you are screwed. Good luck. It's actually like, what do you do based on the data? We're pragmatists. We're interested in what works, and the testing guides us to do what works. Otherwise, we're just like, it's a vanity thing. Like, oh yeah, sure, let's do a test and see what colors your bar charts show up as. That's not useful. So that's just to overview. I really want people to feel empowered. That Hashimoto's that there's lots of different things that influence Hashimoto's, and that these are testable. That there's the mitochondria connection, the iron and other nutrients connection, adrenal connection, gut connection, estrogen connection, and genetics connection, and that there are functional tests out there that are there. There's companies that are available around the world, whether it's hormone testing, gut testing, mitochondria testing, and some unfortunately weird stuff, metal, mold, and Lyme, and then of course genetics. And if people want to learn more, I've got 3 ebooks that are available for free on my website. One on the 10 pillars of health, which is my model and more details on functional testing. 2 on genetics themselves, one on ideal diet, and one on the entire inflammatory and other aspects of genetics. And if people at the time of this recording, I'm still doing application calls. If people like the style in which I present and how I think, and they feel like I'm the one that can support them through their journey, then they can just schedule an application call at my website. There will be a time in the near future where these application calls, I won't be doing them. There'll be other people doing them, or will be done in kind of a group setting. And I am moving more into group support. For example, in the genetics, the genetics is moving towards an opportunities for people to be supported within a group and still get all the information.
Awesome. I think
So that
you are developing a genetic test that you wanted to share with people, right?
it's not. I'm not developing it. I'm creating the teaching. I'm creating the platform that empowers people with the knowledge from the genetics test. So it's looking at identifying your ideal diet. It's looking at your inflammatory pathways. It's looking at the vitamin D pathways. It's also looking at trigger foods, like, are you reactive to gluten, dairy, alcohol, salt, histamines, specific food reactivity to food allergens, and then coffee. The coffee one's interesting. Some people, including me, are genetically vulnerable to caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. Caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. And when I lecture in front of a room of entrepreneurs, you can feel and the collective sphincter of the room just clench, because everyone's just terrified that they're not going to be able to have coffee because their business runs on coffee.
Absolutely.
So it's yeah.
That's great.
That was very confronting for people.
So tell us about, like, where people can find more about you.
So I've got a couple of ways. One is my website, drsamshay.com. You can also go to YouTube and just put in Dr. Sam Shay, and even put Dr. Sam Shay comedy, and you'll get to my YouTube channel. I've got a playlist of my stand-up comedy, as well as I have about 100 or so videos related to health on there as well. Or put my name into whatever, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. There's many different ways to find me.
Awesome, awesome. That was a power-packed presentation and a talk that you gave us today. It was so much enlightening that, people will know that, they can know a lot more about the root cause and what all testing, because I'm sure a lot of people have not heard of all of these tests that you have mentioned today. So now they are empowered with the right information. I'm sure people might have to listen to this episode a couple of times to get all the
Yeah.
gist of it, because it's too complicated, and that is perfectly fine. And our goal was to educate you and, like, kind of just throw in this information so that you are empowered to talk to your doctors.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is the name of it. And I'm so grateful for people like you, Dr. Gupta, who are going out of their way to make summits and podcasts to educate the public in kind of a mass in this kind of group format where people can learn from all sorts of different experts, and because now we are in a position where we can globally educate the public and empower them with knowledge so that they can have agency over their own health. And it's a very different era back in the 80s and 90s when I was going through my health problems, and I was just subject. There was no internet, until like the mid 90s. And so I'm very grateful for you and every other one of our colleagues that makes these summits and similar outreaches like podcasts to empower the public. So I'm very grateful to be part of this.
Absolutely great. Thank you so much. Thank you again for being on the show.